I mean, many people see the military planes flying in with aid for Haiti and say, well, we are doing something. If you think about the argument that I gave you, I would be reluctant to get all happy about the military giving aid. First of all, for the military to be flying in the aid recalls to mind the military occupations of the 1910s, 20s, and 30s. The military was historically used to prop up an elite ruling class and to make sure that political forces antagonistic to the exploitation of the people of Haiti did not gain power. And I would submit for your consideration that the underlying function of using the military for aid is basically to make sure that there are soldiers who will keep an eye on the politics of Haiti so that those who might use the crisis to challenge the status quo that has been so beneficial to outside investors, make sure that those kinds of people do not have a chance at coming to power. And that this problem of Haiti is a problem in a broader world that requires you to ask questions about justice, not only for Haiti, but in your own country, structures of power, and whether or not private enterprise economies are the best model you can have for running societies. That is more or less bringing me to a conclusion. I can take questions, I can tell a story, a talk has a natural ending. I think I've hit it. What, I have 6 minutes? You have a question? But no, you just said hi? You were just looking at your fingernails. Okay. Just joking with you. No questions? Comments, arguments, diatribes? Yeah? It's what I'm trying to do is raise the question in your mind, could we have alternatives? It seems to me that the payoffs that are promised on the private enterprise model aren't there. That year after year, what we are told, at least this is what I've heard in my lifetime, is if you follow these policies, things will improve. The market will expand. The standard of living will rise. In my lifetime, I've just seen the opposite happen. For example, in my profession, according to the American Federation of Teachers, which arguably is a biased source since it's a labor union, something like less than 29% of college teachers nationwide, and I think this includes then the community colleges and all private and public sector colleges, are full-time. The workforce that used to be primarily full-time with a full-time wage and benefits is now more than 70% part-time and or temporary with lowered wages and lowered benefits. Well, from the point of view of personal income, that's not progress. That's regression to standards below the 60s and the 50s and 60s. So it seems to me that we can at least raise questions about the functioning of the private enterprise system. That the private enterprise system has a contradiction built into it. For the investor to make a lot of money, the worker's going to have to get paid less. And yet, who creates the wealth for the investor? Well, seems to me the labor of the worker. And it just seems to be irrational to have a system in which there is so much wealth, in which there is so much productive capacity, that people are going hungry, people are crushed in the rubble of earthquakes, people are homeless, and it seems to me there could be another way of organizing this. Now, how it would be organized, I don't know. That's, as the cliche says, it's the $64,000 question. But we have about 6 billion people on the planet, and a lot of you are very, very bright. And I just watch human beings go through life, and instead of thinking about these questions, which seem to me to be necessary and fundamental, they think about trivial stuff, you know. Who's going to win the Super Bowl? Or, hey, do you know who picked up a Grammy? Did you see the Grammys? I mean, none of this is, when compared to the kinds of problems we face, none of this is necessary. And I think if we put our heads together, we might come up with an answer. How do you prevent the rise of a class that holds economic and political power over your lives? I don't know. You know, I'm giving you probably an answer that's way too long for your question. But to be fair to your question, I will say that people who do criticize the private enterprise system have to deal with the fact that there were revolutions against it in the 20th century, and those revolutions failed. I mean, they resurrected the private enterprise model. And so then the question becomes, how are those failures, were they inevitable? Is there no other way out? Or did they have internal errors and mistakes that we could learn from so that you don't reproduce another ruling class? And I don't have the answer to that question, and I'm sorry I don't. On the other hand, I'm just one guy and I don't have to have all the answers. Sometimes it's hard enough getting the questions. Yeah.
Just want to know that as students and to be, can you hear me?
Barely.
I was saying as students and as people who are going to get into the workforce, a lot of the things you're talking about is on our minds. So how can we kind of participate in trying to alleviate these issues?
Okay, if you didn't hear his question, if I could rephrase it, and if I do it unjustly, let me know. As students are entering the workforce, what can we do to address these issues and alleviate these problems? Very immediately, I would say, I would recommend the political activism at the point of production. I would suggest, I think now that I'm very advanced in my teaching career, I have this regret of not teaching students labor history earlier on. I would say you should study the history of working classes around the world and the political movements they created, either to reform the systems in which they lived or to overcome them through revolutions. And in the United States, just to restrict the remarks to the US of A, there was a very vibrant and powerful labor movement that began in the late 1800s. It had different political currents, philosophies, but in the 20th century it became very revolutionary, and actually in the 1930s built a movement that forced the political establishment to make the 8-hour day a legal requirement, limit the work week to 5 days, to give people some kind of social security or retirement compensation, eventually led years and years and years later to some kind of Medicare program. It's not national health insurance, but that's what we got. And so this activism occurred at the point of production, that is to say in factories and offices. And the basic weapon that laborers used was the strike. Because when you don't work, not individually, but collectively, when you are at work and you say, we are not working, we are not producing, everything falls apart. Or rather, production stops and the rulers now either have to repress you severely, or if they can't do that, they will have to negotiate with you. And there were huge labor strikes were very effective. The most effective type of labor strike was the